So about a year ago, I put together a video that was all about adjustable hosel drivers, talking about how they work, how they change things, basically covering all the stuff that nobody ever really tells you about how these work. And that video was very popular, it's done very well. I've gotten a lot of very kind comments about it. And like I said, it's been about a year now, so I figured, well, maybe it's time to revisit this topic and sort of dive back into it, because I still get a lot of questions regarding the adjustable hosel drivers, and specifically I get more questions about certain particular drivers, like certain brands, i.e. I've got a Callaway driver and I want to do this, or I've got a Cobra driver and what happens if I change this. So I figured this would probably be a good time to revisit adjustable hosel drivers and really sort of look at not just the broad idea of adjustable hosel drivers, but actually look at the specific differences in each of the different brands that use them. So this is going to be adjustable hosel drivers part 2. Let's go. Hi everyone, welcome to the Mobile Clubmaker. I'm AJ. I hope you're having a wonderful day. So we are going to get right into these adjustable hosel drivers. And again, we are going to be focusing not on the broad sort of idea of how these work, but actually looking specifically at each of the different brands that use one, each of the major brands that use one. And we're going to really look at how each of them utilize that adjustable hosel driver. How do they market it? What do they actually offer you as far as the changes go? Maybe what they're not telling you when they are marketing it. So we're going to cover all that. Okay, so hopefully you've already seen my original adjustable hosel driver video, and if you haven't, I would really recommend you watch that video before you watch this one, because that gives you sort of the framework for how all of this works, and I'm not going to get into all the detail I did in that video in this video. So if you have questions about the basics of what's going on with the adjustable hosel golf club, how they work, how these changes present themselves, I would definitely check out that video first. I'll put a link down in the description below. You can check that out. But once you've watched that, you can come right back here, and we're going to pick up from there and look at each of the major brands, looking at what their adjustable hosel does, maybe what they're telling you it does, maybe what they're kind of leaving off, and just kind of cover each individual brand so you have a better idea what your particular driver is doing when you make those hosel adjustments. Okay, so we're going to cover all the major brands today that have an adjustable hosel driver. So that's going to be TaylorMade, Callaway, Titleist, Cobra, Mizuno, Srixon, Ping, and PXG. So those 8. And within that, in each of those, I want to cover a few different things. So I want to talk about what kind of adjustable hosel are they using first? Is it just a rotating sleeve? Is it something with cogs? Is it a combination? That'll be first. Next thing, how much adjustability do they offer you? Can you change the loft, 2 degrees? Can you only change it 1 degree? Third is going to be how many different settings do you have available to you? Some of them have up to 16 different settings. Some of them only have 8. So just something to be aware of. Next thing I want to talk about is the starting position for each of these clubs, because when you get the club from the factory or off the rack at the store, where is the adjustable hosel set when you just pick it up as your starting point? Because each brand is going to be different. They're not all setting it at the same spot. Some of them are setting it in a more upright position. Some of them are setting it in a flatter position. Some of them are adjusting the loft in the starting position. So it's definitely something you want to be aware of, because when you start making those adjustments, you want to know where you started before you start making adjustments, so you know what to expect once you start making changes. Last 2 things I want to cover are going to be, well, when you make a change, how do they describe, how do they market what that change is? And lastly, going along with that, what are they omitting? What are they leaving out when they tell you, you do this to the hosel adjustment and this happens, but maybe what are they not telling you that you may still want to be aware of? Okay, so I know I said I wasn't going to go and sort of revisit what we did in the first adjustable hosel driver video, but just as a very quick sort of overview of it, just so we're on the same page as we go through this, I figured I would just cover the very basics of what happens when the shaft is being adjusted. So all of this is basically happening. All these adjustments happen because the hosel sleeve is at a slight angle from how the shaft enters it. That slight angle is what gives the driver all its adjustability, because what ends up happening is as you rotate the hosel or change the cogs, it moves the position of the shaft around the head. And those slight changes, once you bring them back into a neutral position, present whatever the change is you're trying to achieve. So when it comes to loft, what happens is if you're trying to make the driver higher lofted, the hosel sleeve will move the shaft sort of pointing towards your target more. What happens then when you reset back to a neutral setup position, it increases the loft. Likewise, if you're trying to lower the loft, it sets the hosel so the shaft is pointing away from the target. What happens here, you bring the shaft back up to a neutral position, the loft goes down. Same thing with lie angle. If you're trying to make the lie more upright, they set it like this. You bring the, I should do this, I should flip this actually. So if you're trying to make the lie more upright, the hosel adjustment brings the shaft up like this. You bring that shaft back to your playing position and the toe comes up. You've made the club more upright. Switch that opposite if you want to make it flatter, goes that way. So that's the basis for how all the adjustable hosel clubs work. That's what's happening. They're manipulating the shaft around in a sort of clock pattern to get all the different lofts and lie changes. Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about TaylorMade. TaylorMade seems like probably the best place to start because they've been doing it for the longest. They're the ones who basically invented the adjustable hosel. So we're going to start with them. And TaylorMade gives you probably the most information of anybody as far as what they tell you these changes are doing. So that is always a good thing when you have as much information as possible. The hosel adapter that they use, the type of sleeve they use, is just a standard rotating hosel, which means if you want to make a change to the golf club, you have to rotate the entire hosel along with the shaft. So the entire shaft, grip, everything has to rotate with it. That is something you want to be aware of with any of these rotating hosels, is if you make a change, you will have to change the orientation of the shaft and the grip. So just something to be aware of. As far as what it changes, as far as how much change it offers you, TaylorMade's setting on these hosel adapters is 2 degrees. So what that means is you have got up to 4 degrees total change in loft and lie. Whatever the stated loft is on that golf club, say it's 9.5, you can adjust that loft down to 7.5, or you can adjust it up to 11.5. So you've got 2 degrees all the way around. How many settings are offered? With TaylorMade, you've got 12 different settings. So you've got 12 different notches, basically, that you can set that driver into. So TaylorMade, like I said, they give you more information, basically, than anyone. They tell you when you make any change to the hosel adapter, what happens to the loft, what happens to the lie angle, and what happens to the face angle. They tell you all those. I think they also give you something about how much it changes the backspin even. So they really give you a ton of information, more than anyone else, as far as any change that you make. There's nothing really left off. They give you all the information. They are very sort of, I don't want to use the word transparent, but they throw all the information at you and let you do with it as you will. Finally, the starting position. The starting position on all TaylorMade drivers is going to be what I call the 6 o'clock position. That basically means that's the flattest position that the hosel adapter can be in. So the shaft is basically, if this is completely neutral, this is an exaggeration, but sorry, I keep doing this. Let's switch it, flip it around. If this is completely neutral, this is going to be what the TaylorMade starts at. It's at the flattest position. So any adjustment you make from here, be it loft or be it a lie change, any of them are going to make the club more upright. Again, something to be aware of. Okay, next up is Callaway. Now, Callaway's adapter is a little different. They are one of the few brands that actually use a cog method of adjusting the hosel. So as you can see, they have these two separate little cogs that you rotate around and move into different positions in order to make changes to loft, lie, all that. The benefit of something like this is you don't actually rotate the shaft and the grip at all. You are only rotating these little hogs, excuse me, these little cogs. So whatever change you make, the shaft orientation will remain the same. The grip orientation will remain the same. So if you have something like this align grip on there, you can keep that grip as it sits because that's not going to rotate around. Likewise, if you've got your logo down on your grip, on your grip or your shaft, the logo is down and you start making changes, you're not going to have to worry about all of a sudden the logo being in some weird orientation on the side of the shaft or something like that, because it'll always be in the same position it started in. As far as how much variation they give you, how much change they offer you, they are going to give you a total of up to 3 degrees, basically 1.5 degrees either way. Okay, so the starting position on the Callaway, that gets a little bit trickier because most of these clubs are going to be either in the 12 o'clock position, straight, more upright position, or in the 6 o'clock position, flatter position, but they're not going to have any impact on the loft. Callaway is one of the brands that actually sets their neutral position where it affects the loft. What that means is, and when you look at their marketing materials, how they advertise it, they will tell you that you can loft down, you can lower the loft by 1 degree, but you can increase the loft by 2 degrees. And the way that they can do that is their starting position is already adjusting the loft a little bit. So like I said, this adjustable hosel is set in more like 4:30 as opposed to 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock. And that allows them to either lower the loft 1 degree or raise it 2 degrees. Okay, so Callaway is a little different when we talk about what they are telling you about the changes you make. Whereas TaylorMade tells you everything. They tell you the loft, they tell you the lie, they tell you the whole deal. Callaway is a little more selective in what they tell you. So they're going to talk about the loft, and that's going to be the main thing they discuss, is how much the loft changes. They're also going to then refer to either the head being more draw biased or neutral. And when they're talking about when they're talking about more draw biased or neutral, that is just talking about, is that club in a more upright lie angle or in a more flat or standard lie angle. Basically, when you make an adjustment and the lie gets to a certain point, they consider that more of a draw setting. If it's below that, it's considered neutral. So there's never going to be what they would consider a fade setting. It's either, if it's below a certain level, it's considered neutral, and if it's above a certain setting, they consider it a draw setting. So something to be aware of regarding that, obviously, is when you make any of these adjustments, these adjustments are not made in a vacuum. If you're changing the loft, it's going to have an impact on the lie and vice versa. So just be aware when you make a change to the loft that there is going to be a lie angle change. Now, in most cases, it's pretty small. The lie angle change on a driver usually doesn't influence your golf shot that much, but definitely something to be aware of. And again, because Callaway doesn't come right out and say that this is what's happening when you make these changes, it's definitely something you want to have in the back of your mind. Okay, next up is Ping. Now, Ping, like TaylorMade, is going to be using just a rotating hosel. There's no cogs. It's just, if you want to make a change, you rotate the hosel, which is also rotating, again, rotating the shaft, rotating the grip, just to be aware of that. As far as how much change you can get out of the Ping adapter, you've got 3 degrees total. So the loft from the low end to the high end is going to be 3 degrees total. That's also going to be the lie angle change, obviously. The number of settings they give you, there's going to be 8 settings. So that's, again, sort of like Callaway. They're going to give you 8 different options for your loft and lie changes. Now, when it comes to the starting position on the Ping is actually the opposite, if you will, of, say, the TaylorMade. Now, the TaylorMade, like we said, was at 6 o'clock. The Ping is actually, the starting position is at 12 o'clock. So that's the most upright lie angle. So it's going to be the most like that. Again, this is something to be aware of. If you make any changes to the loft, you're going to be flattening out the lie angle. So something to be aware of that will, in theory, promote more of a fade, promote more of a a right moving ball if you're a right-handed golfer. So Ping will really just focus on two things. They focus on the loft, and they give you the little plus or minus symbols to designate what you're doing. And then they focus on the lie angle, but they really only focus on it as either being neutral or, in this case, flat. And this is kind of like what Callaway did also, in that up to a certain point, they're going to consider it neutral. But if you make the adjustment below or over 1.5 degrees, then all of a sudden they consider that flat. So if you make a loft adjustment and you go from, say, that 12 o'clock position that the shaft started in to a 10 o'clock position, that would still be considered, according to them, just the neutral lie angle. But if you make an adjustment and you go from that 12 o'clock position down to, say, 4 o'clock position or 5 o'clock position, that is where they are considering that flat lie angle. Again, just something to be aware of, because how they describe it may not be how you're understanding it. So you want to understand when you make these changes, again, any change in loft on the Ping is going to flatten out the lie angle. Okay, next up is Titleist. And Titleist is, again, this one is completely unique, because whereas you've usually got either the rotating hosel or you've got the cog system, well, Titleist said, we're going to do a little of both. So it's got a combination of a rotating hosel and a cog. So you are going to, in some cases, be moving, rotating the shaft, the grip, all of that when you're making these adjustments. Or in some cases you may not, and you may just be adjusting the cog. Their system is a little bit different. It's a little trickier to understand. I kind of liken it to the teacups at Disneyland, where you have sort of everything rotating on one big platform, and then on top of that you have the little teacups moving separately but also rotating. That's kind of what's going on with the Titleist. You've got the one rotating hosel moving things, and then you've got the second cog rotating them again. So they've got this combination of a cog and a rotating hosel. Now with Titleist, they only give you 2.25 degrees of total available change. That's the most you can get out of it, going from the lowest loft to the highest loft, or lowest lie to the highest lie. It's only 2.25, which is less than most of the other brands. On the other end of it, though, they give you up to 16. They give you 16 different options for different configurations. So it's a little bit confusing why they do that, because you've only got 2.25 degrees of total change possible, but they give you 16 different options. So they're really, you're really slicing that pie awfully thin when you're talking about those sort of changes. But that's how they chose to do it, so that's what you've got to work with. As far as the information they give you loft and they give you lie, and they tell you how it changes both the loft and the lie with each of the different settings. They have it in a little sort of matrix chart that you can see when you make these changes. So Titleist, and Titleist is kind of like Callaway. Titleist starts at about 430 when we're talking about their neutral position on their adjustable hosel. So again, that allows them to offer more loft change going up, less loft change going down, because they're already sort of manipulating the loft in the neutral setting. So that 2.25 degrees, basically they're offering up 1.5 degrees or down 0.75 degrees. And they can do that because they position it sort of in that 430 position. Theirs, again, is a little more complicated because they've got those two separate cogs with the 16 different positions. So it's a little bit trickier than just the Callaway. But the basic thing you want to understand is that that's how they're giving you those loft options of going up in loft more versus going down in loft. Okay, next up is Cobra, and Cobra, just like TaylorMade, just like Ping, they have a rotating hosel. So again, you're going to be rotating the shaft, you're going to be rotating the grip if you make any changes. The total amount of change that they offer is going to be 3 degrees. That is from low to high. They give you 3 degrees of available change. They, again, also have 8 different settings that you can pick from. Their starting position, when we're talking about Cobra, again, like TaylorMade, they're starting in that 6 o'clock position. So that flattest lie angle position is where they start. So any sort of adjustment you make to the loft, be it going up in loft or going down in loft, you're going to be making that lie angle more upright. And Cobra, a lot like Callaway, basically says, if we're talking about lie angle, we're not going to talk about lie angle and say lie angle. We're going to refer to it as either being neutral or more draw biased. So the higher that lie angle gets, basically when that lie angle moves over 1.5 degrees above what it started at in its stock setting, they then consider that a draw setting. So if you move, again, moving that hosel, if it starts in 6 o'clock and you move it to 10 o'clock or you move it to 2 o'clock, both of those they are going to consider a draw setting because you've made that lie angle more upright. Okay, next up is Mizuno. And like this driver I have here, which is a Mizuno, they have a rotating adjustable hosel. So again, if you make a change, you're rotating the shaft, you're rotating the grip. The amount of change that they have available. Now, this gets a little bit tricky because when you look at it, it looks like it's 4 degrees. It should be 4 degrees that they have. Basically, this shaft is set at a 2-degree angle to the adapter. However, when you look at some of their marketing materials, they seem to show that when you're making a lie angle change, you only have 3 degrees of change, but when you're making a loft change, you have up to 4.5 degrees of change. Now, if you understand what we've been talking about and how these work, that really shouldn't happen because it's basically just the shaft rotating around evenly around the hosel. So it should be that same 2 degrees regardless of what direction it's pointing. Somehow they're saying that the lie angle is only 3 degrees and the loft is 4.5 degrees. Now I don't exactly know how they're doing that. The only thing I could possibly think of is maybe the hosel is actually somewhat elliptical, which allows the shaft to maybe lean further in the face direction or in the target direction or away from the target, which would give you greater loft variations. But I don't think that's actually the case. I think they're just sort of fudging the numbers a little bit as far as I can tell. If someone from Mizuno would like to contact me and clarify how they do this, I would love to hear it because, like I said, right now it definitely doesn't make sense because every other brand, you know, it's an even amount all the way around and somehow Mizuno gets 2 very different sets of numbers. Okay, so all that being said, we're not exactly sure how much you can adjust the loft, but I think it's fair to say it's probably 4 degrees. So you've got 4 degrees, so that 9.5 degree driver can go down to 7.5 or it can go up to 11.5. You've got 8 different settings again in this particular hosel configuration to get those settings the way you want them. Mizuno, again, like TaylorMade, is going to start you out in that 6 o'clock in that flattest position. So any sort of adjustment you make will be changing the lie, will be making it more upright. Mizuno is very upfront, again, as far as what the loft and the lie changes are. So they tell you it's changing the loft, it's changing the lie. I think they also actually tell you face angle also, but they give you all that information. Okay, next is PXG. Now PXG, you know, PXG is basically developed from a lot of old Ping engineers, so it's not surprising that the PXG stuff is going to be very similar to the Ping stuff in how they set that up. So again, you've got the rotating hosel. Again, if you make an adjustment, shaft, grip will be rotating with it. You've got 3 degrees of total change available to you. So low to high, 3 degrees of change. You've got 8 different settings available to you, and you start in that 12 o'clock position. They also are using little symbols to designate whether you're increasing the loft or going down in loft. So basically everything that I said about Ping, you can also apply to PXG. The main difference, the only real difference being that Ping doesn't really focus on the lie angle numbers. In PXG, you can sometimes find charts that actually show you how much the lie angle is changing, not just the loft, whereas Ping, again, was just either saying that it's neutral or it's flat. So they are giving you a little bit more information there. Okay, last on the list, Srixon. Now, the Srixon driver, again, is going to be a rotating hosel. Again, you rotate it, shaft change, grip change, all that is adjusted when you make the hosel adjustment. The amount of change on the Srixon, they only give you 2 degrees. So you've only got 2 degrees to play with. So that 9-degree driver, say, is either going to be 8 degree or 10 degree. And they actually give you 12 different settings. Again, this is kind of like Titleist, where there's not a huge amount of change available to you, but you have a lot of different setting options for that very small amount of change. But that's how they choose to do it. The starting position, again, they're going to be in that 6 o'clock position. They're going to be in that flattest position, so any adjustment you make will be making the club more upright. But again, because you're working with such a small number to start with, only 2 degrees total, any sort of change you make is really going to be minimal as far as what that does to the lie angle. So probably not even worth thinking about it too much. Srixon also, like TaylorMade, is very upfront with all the numbers. They give you the lofts, they give you the lies, they tell you all about face angle. So they give you all the information and let you do with it as you please. Okay, so one more thing. So if you're ever having questions about, what is my particular driver setting in right now, what I can't remember if the big plus sign means, 1.5 degrees bigger, or is the upright supposed to be 2 degrees upright? I can't quite remember what it's supposed to be. I don't have the information in front of me. How do I kind of figure this out on the fly? And what I'll tell you is, if you're having issues figuring it out, you can basically just eyeball it. You can look at the golf club and you can figure out where that hosel adjustment is set to. So what you want to do is basically just look at the driver, and hopefully this is in focus. And basically what you want to do is, you can do this one of 2 ways. Either you want to line this up so that the hosel is completely perpendicular to the ground, or that the shaft is completely perpendicular to the ground. Either one. But once you have that, I'm going to use the hosel here. Once you have that, you can then basically look, my hosel is completely up and down, and you can see that the shaft is kind of leaning back away from the target slightly. Again, we talked about this earlier. That's how Callaway, in this case, is able to change the loft more going up in loft versus down, because they're artificially adjusting it in the neutral setting. After you look at it that way, you can also look at it in this orientation. Again, I'm getting the hosel perfectly straight up and down, perpendicular to the ground, and you can see that the shaft, again, is sort of leaning this way. It's even easier with this Mizuno or with the TaylorMade, because you've got 4 degrees of change available. That means that the shaft and the hosel are set 2 degrees apart. So setting up the hosel, lining it up, and then checking out how the shaft is in relation to that is going to give you a very obvious indication of what position the shaft is in. As you can see right here, because this club is set where neutral is not making any sort of adjustment to the loft, you can see it's perfectly straight up and down. The shaft and the hosel adapter are in the same plane. You go this way, however, or we'll go this way, and you can very easily see here's the hosel adapter going like this, and the shaft is going more like this. There's that flatter 6 o'clock starting position. Very easy to see, especially with a Mizuno or a TaylorMade or something that has a greater angle on its adapter to start with. Okay, so I think we've covered all the major brands now. Again, I hope this just sort of gives you a little more information as far as when you're making these changes, what is happening as a result of them. Because as we've shown, certain brands are going to tell you exactly what's going on, not just for the loft, but for the lie, for the face angle, for all of it. Certain brands are just going to sort of cherry pick or just sort of highlight certain things. The loft is obviously always going to be the front and center thing. That's the most important thing. But some of them will talk about lie angle, and some of them will sort of just kind of brush it aside, or not even refer to it as lie angle, but just refer to it as either a draw bias or a neutral setup. So again, understanding that when one company maybe says the head is draw biased, what that actually means is that it's more upright in lie angle. That's a good thing to know. Again, we didn't even really get into face angle as far as the face angle adjustments, other than telling you that TaylorMade, Mizuno, I think PXG maybe says things about face angle. If you have questions about how the face angle changes when you make these other changes, again, I would check back to that first adjustable hosel video where I get into all that, how that happens, why that happens. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please go down below, give it a thumbs up. Also go down, hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and hit that bell icon so you can be alerted of new videos when I post them. Please leave a question or comment down below. I always read and respond to all of those. I'm also now on Instagram. You can find me there at Mobile Club Maker. And until next time, take care. We will see you on the next video. Bye.